Greetings! Let's go through another example together. This example will give you an opportunity to practice what you already learned about constructors, and it will also teach you a really important new set of concepts, the idea of a getter method and a setter method. So before I tell you what it's all about, go ahead and make a new project, and let's create some classes. So I'll make a class called pointTester, and that one will have a main method, because this is going to be the class that we're going to use to test the object that you're going to define. Okay, so before we actually define our new object, let's think about the games that we've been making for a second. So whenever we've been making our games and we have an object that moves around, we've had XY coordinates that define where is the object. So for example, something like this. So these XY coordinates always describe a single point on the screen. It describes maybe where the center of a circle is. So instead of doing something like this, it might be better if we could create our own data type that represents a single point. So we want to be able to do something like this. We'd want to say point P, and then P equals, and then we're going to run a constructor, which is going to make a new point object, and we'll construct it at the inputs 300, 300. So this code is intended to do the same thing that this code does. Here I'm creating XY variables and setting them to 300, 300. Here I'm creating a point variable, and inside my point object, it will have an X and a Y. And then this is what actually creates the point object, and these inputs, the 300, 300, those are going to get assigned to the XY variables that are inside the point object. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the point class. Remember that whatever you call your class, I called it point, that's the same name that you're going to use for the data type here that will save objects that are examples of that class. So it's good to name it something kind of like a sensible noun, like point. All right, so here's the point class. I'm going to leave it to you as a little exercise right now. So remember, at the very top of the class, you want to define whatever variables you want your object to have. So in our case, I think that's an X and a Y. And then you want to make the constructor. And remember, the purpose of the constructor is to take some inputs that will save values into those variables. So pause the video right now and see if you can complete just those two pieces. All right, I'll show you my solution. So you might want them to be ints, or you might want them to be doubles. I guess I'll make them doubles. So I'm going to make a variable for X and a variable for Y. So those will be the X and Y for my points. The constructor is going to be public. It doesn't have a return value, so not void, not anything else. It's just blank. That's part of how the computer knows it's a constructor. And then the name of the method is the same as the name of my class, point. Okay, well the job of the constructor is to take some inputs so that I can save values up here. So I'm going to have two inputs, X and Y. And now I can't say X equals X, Y equals Y. Well, what I want to be doing is I want to be saving these input values up here. But notice this is called X and this is called X. So saying X equals X, it doesn't know, like, do I save this one into here? Do I save this one into here? So that's why we use the keyword this. The keyword this refers to the current object that's running. So if I say this X, we're talking about the X's that are associated with the point itself. And you can see the color coding here. That's brown, this is blue, this is blue. Okay, so that's the constructor. Let's make our windows side by side. So take your tab and kind of drag it off to the side here. All right, so now I'm going to show you how to make two very special kinds of methods called getter methods and setter methods, and I'll tell you kind of why you want to be able to do that. So here I am in the tester. Let's say that I want to change where this point is located. I can't say X equals 200. I can't set a new X coordinate because the problem is the X variable is defined inside the point object. So this X doesn't have any meaning. So I need some way of telling the point object that I want it to change its own variables in here. That's what a setter method does. You're thinking about it from the perspective of the tester, from the perspective of someone who's using this object. I want to be able to tell the point, hey point, I would like you to set your X coordinate. So if I'm telling it that I want it to set its X coordinate to something different, I've got to give it an input, like what's the new X coordinate. So if you keep focused in your mind, how does it make sense to to use the method, that's what's going to help you create it in the right way. So if I want to be able to create a set method over here in points, I'll say public void, and then set x is the name of the method here I'm trying to create. And then I need to give it the new x coordinate, 200. So that means I need to have a variable here that can save that input. So I'm going to call this I'll call this new x for the new x coordinate. All right, so the purpose of the set x, it's sort of like what the constructor does already. Set x is supposed to take an input and save it as the x coordinate up here. So I'll say this.x gets set to the new x. And now you see over here, it seems to have stopped complaining because it recognizes that this is a method. Okay, what I want you to do right now as a little exercise is create a set y method that's exactly the same, that will let you reset whatever the y variable is inside point. Okay, pause the video and go ahead and make it. And here's what a good solution would look like. So that's setter methods. Setter methods let you change these values. A getter method is the opposite of that. A getter method is a way of asking the point to tell you what the value of its variable is right now. So if I'm out here, I might want to say, like, if the x coordinate is greater than 600, then I'd want to do something. Like, that's how we test to see, is the center of the ball object off the right-hand side of the screen, for example. Okay, well, again, same problem. X is not a variable that's defined in this class. X is only inside the point. So I need a way to ask the point, what is your x coordinate? So that's what a getter method does. It lets the code over here get the x value out of the point. So the way that you ask a point to do anything is you start with the name and you say p dot, and now I want to say get x. So again, think of this as a question that I'm asking the point. I'm asking it, give me your x value. And then once I got the x value, I can test, is it bigger than 600? All right, so how's this going to work? Over here in points, I'll say public. Okay, so if the code here is asking for an x coordinate, that must mean I want a value to come back over here as an answer. So this method needs to return something back to the tester. So what am I going to be returning? I'm returning my own x coordinate. So that means, and my x coordinate's a double, so that means I've got to have a return type that's a double here. So get x, and then I'll say return this.x. So again, I think this makes a lot of sense if you think about the purpose. The purpose is to let somebody else run this method and have this object return its value. So that's why you're going to return that value. Okay, so in the method signature up here, you've got to have the name that's named after your variable. And then the return type has to match whatever the data type of your variable is here. All right, so again, it stopped complaining. That seems to be working now. So go ahead and change this to y, and why don't you write your own getter method for y. All right, here's my answer. I've got a get y here that's going to return this.y. Last but not least, let's go ahead and write a display state method again. I'll just call it display maybe. This is just a nice way of having the tester be able to have the object display all of its variables so that we can see what they are without having to run each getter method separately. So so we got x and then a comma and then y. Okay, so this is going to let you test to make sure that the setter methods have worked correctly. So I set the y, so let's set y to be 600. So now if I say p.display and I run the point tester, it says 200, 600. So here, let's display it before the setters also. So if I display the xy coordinates before I reset them, it's 300, 300, which is the same as I constructed it with. And then I run the two set methods, and now when I display afterwards, you see that they've changed to 200, 600. Okay, so this is, I was going to say this is a toy example, but actually creating a point object is pretty practically useful for the stuff we're going to be creating. But this is a relatively simple example. There's just a couple of variables. There's not a lot of methods besides getters and setters. It's pretty normal to have your object have many different variables here and to have, a dozen methods, 20 methods, 30 methods, lots of different methods. Because the idea is, in order for your object to be useful in a lot of different circumstances, you want to give it a lot of different things it can do. Think about my turtle object. My turtle object, you can go turn right, turn left, go forward, but you can pick up your pen and put it back down again. You can change the color, all these things. In fact, this might be a good time to dip back in and look at my turtle object, and you can kind of see what are the variables that a turtle has and what are all the methods that make the turtle go.